Thanks for coming to the MIT Symposium. This is the Navigating the Clouds panel. I'm Christo, Ovcharov, the panel captain, and I would like to give the floor to John Dix. John Dix was instrumental in bringing together this panel and preparing a nice panel discussion for us. John, you have the floor.
Am I on? Yeah, great. Thanks very much for coming. This morning, I presume you all made it to the early sessions. A lot of big picture discussion about everything from artificial intelligence to the future of work, even the shape of the organization going forward. We're going to be bringing it back a little bit to the here and now with a panel discussion about issues and questions surrounding the adoption of cloud computing. And to do that, we have 3 practitioners and 1 cloud service provider. So on my immediate left from Rome, Fabio Veronese. How'd I do? All right. He's CTO. He's the CTO of Enel, which is a gigantic energy company serving 31 countries over in Europe. To his right, David Giambruno, Chief Information Officer of Shutterstock, up from New York. And on his right, Patrick Gilmore, CTO of the Markley Group, provider of infrastructure as a service based right here in Boston. And on his right, Nathan McBride, CIO of Amag Pharmaceuticals in Waltham now, I believe, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So if we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to ask you guys to just give us a thumbnail description of your company, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, okay. I work at Enel, which is an utility. Originally started in Italy, and now it has a footprint which goes beyond Europe. We have operation also in South America and distribution in North America for renewables. And if we forget China for a moment in terms of market caps, in terms of digital meter installed, in terms of length of the distribution network, or in terms of renewable capacity, it is the biggest utility at the moment. And excuse me for one thing, we had just one preparatory call with John, and I was driving, but I was not able to understand what she was telling me. And probably he did not understand what I was telling to him. So in the next question, I don't know what he is going to ask me, and he doesn't know what I'm going to say. So, okay, it will be kind of live session.
I told you not to admit that. David?
So Shutterstock, global platform for royalty-free photos, videos, and music. So we have tens of millions of customers and billions of pieces of thing operating at web scale.
Great. Patrick?
Markley Group is a large co-location provider that started a cloud infrastructure as a service provider a few years ago. I came over to run the technology division, but most of the revenue actually still comes from colo, but we fully expect that to change because everything's going cloud these days, right?
Nate?
And Amag is a medium-sized pharma company based here in Waltham. We have 5 products commercially available in the US, domestic sales only. And our emphasis is primarily on M&A and clinical commercial pipelines.
Great. So we do have some questions that I worked out over the phone with these guys before the event, but about a third of the way in, if you guys have questions too, please raise your hand. We'll try to get you a mic. They're filming this, so we will either repeat your question or give you a mic to make sure that we get that on the record. But I want to start off with, I talked to the CTO of General Electric about 2 months ago. A lot of representation of GE here at this event today too, but he was saying how that they favor software as a service for non-differentiated applications like HR, billing, et cetera, but will continue to develop core applications that enable GE to do field services better, sell better, do predictive analytics better. So is that something that you folks all subscribe to at this point? Are you SaaS first for most all new applications? Is that a preferred method?
Shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, this is not the way we decided to work. The first thing we decided was that Enel should be a cloud-first company. That has been decided 3 years ago. And so all the new applications had to go to the cloud. But not necessarily to software as a service, because it depends on the kind of application, basically. So the point was that no more new investment, no more new application, no more new hiring on technology that was based on premises. This was the first thing. So we were very focused on defining the strategy, and what we decided was that infrastructure and platform as a service provider had to be few, because when you move to infrastructure, you need to manage your automation, your monitoring, all kind of services. While we left kind of a freedom to choose the right software as a service provider, provided that it was a real software as a service provider, because I don't want to name company here, I don't want to be unpolite to anybody, but there are a way to get into the cloud market is to provide a software as a service solution only for the higher stack, only to discover a month after that it relies heavily on platform or infrastructure services that you don't want to get tied to. So you think you buy a software as a service, and you end up with a tied connection with platform infrastructure as a service. So my advice is you don't necessarily need to go to software as a service only to prove that you're moving to the cloud, but just be aware of what you're doing. You manage software as a service in one way, and you manage infrastructure and platform as a service in another way.
That's interesting. I never heard someone say that before. Right, David?
So the thing I work with my team is the difference between command versus create. Which technology should you command, and which technology should you create? And for me, and for the team, it's really about, if there is an entire company devoted to that capability, you should probably buy that one, right? Because you are never going to be able to outcompete it, right? Be great at our products and our capabilities and the things that can drive either intellectual property, revenue, and capabilities. And again, those things where you can drive innovation, because we're all either after taking market share or keeping market share, right? Or organic or accretive growth. And so when you think about that, it's always buy versus build, and that should go through your entire stack. And so the capability really comes down to understanding where that teeter-totter and the balance is for your business. I've done lots of ERPs. If you do not have a supply chain, why would you blow your brains out doing anything on-prem? Go off-prem, right? Those are, to me, really simple decisions that add a lot of capability. There's always the silent or the little asterisk after anything SaaS. You still have to operate it, right? So the joke I have about SaaS, instead of building a house, you're buying a condo. But you still got to paint it and do the counters and choose your countertops. Am I going to do concrete, stainless steel, or whatever material, right? But you're going to go through that process. And when it's done, since we're moving into an API economy world, right? You need people who understand how APIs work and link all this stuff together to be able to operate it, because that's the operational layer now, is really the API structure.
Patrick, how about what are your customers, what do you hear from your customers regarding that question?
I think my customers are in line with what you said at the beginning. It's go SaaS where you can and build where you can't. And hopefully they will be, using Colo or cloud for the infrastructure part. But even as a provider, I should mention that we have the same strategy. It's probably, I don't know if I'm violating an NDA or whatever, but we use Salesforce. It's not terribly surprising, right? The idea that I would spend my team's time building a database that somebody else has already built is just silly. And we do exactly what my esteemed colleague said. We have interface and API to it that pulls into the database that we need to run our customers. But the sales guys aren't, checking LinkedIn or sending, follow-up emails through our system. They're sending them through Salesforce. And we have a few other SaaS providers that we use. I think it really just comes down to use the best tool for the job, right? You don't want to use a hammer if a wrench is better. And you need to decide in your use case what that tool is. But I do really like the point about watch out. Your SaaS provider might be using some other infrastructure provider, and then there's a shared fate there. We try really hard on our infrastructure as a service to make sure that there is no shared fate, but it's impossible. We use VMware, for instance, for a lot of our customers because they use it internally and they want to use it on the cloud, so no big deal. But the thing is, if there's a VMware bug, I'm not fixing that. right? Like nobody on my team has the source code to VMware. And it runs on Windows frequently, and nobody in my team has a source code to Microsoft. There's shared fate anywhere you go. So don't think that you can get away from it unless you really are building it from the ground up. And some companies do that, but that's a ridiculously Herculean task. But know where it is, and then be prepared for it. We use routers. We have Cisco and Juniper. If there's a bug in one, the other one still works. Just make sure that you do things like that. When Twitter fell down because Dyn DNS had an attack, lots of other companies didn't because they had a second DNS provider. Dyn is huge. They're important. Well, now they're Oracle, and I love them. I know them personally. I think they do a great job, but no one is perfect. Use multiple providers whenever possible and know where your weak spots are.
If it's quick.
Yeah, he's hitting on it, but in this world, the network is the center of the universe again. So the one counsel I give to everybody is make sure you have really awesome network capabilities. That does not go away. If your network doesn't work, nothing works.
All right, Nathan, instead of putting the same question to you, I'm going to change the question because I know something about where you are. Nathan joined the company and immediately tried to close down the data center, move everything to the cloud. So tell us about that. So you're not only cloud first, you're cloud only, or that's the vision anyway.
Yeah,
where do you stand on that?
And lacking a data center, the SaaS question is obvious to us. We really don't have a choice. It's going to be SaaS or generally nothing. We have pivoted back towards a development model, but only at the presentation layer. So we're looking at a lot of these sort of low-code, no-code platforms now to bring in to allow development to happen within the business. Sort of structured and organized, of course, under governance, but a lot of what we found is that a lot of the SaaS apps we've been investing in over the years, and we have, I think, 220 or so in our library, they're all very nice and fine for accomplishing the job, whether it's enterprise layer, so Oracle Fusion Cloud, or it's sort of farther down the stack like Lucid Charter or Trello. In between, you want to go into those platforms and now start bringing out data in new forms, and that's sort of what we look at, that API layer, that middleware layer, that's where we're sort of going now. So a lot of it is building now on top of the SaaS cloud that we use and presenting new functionality over sort of old data or old concepts.
Are you data center free at this point?
Well, we have a GXP data center, which is a qualified data center in our Tucson laboratory, but it's for our supply chain system for that particular kit. Beyond that, it's fun to walk in there and see it every now and then, touch it, and see the blinky lights blinking.
We call them server huggers.
Yes.
I pimped the data center once. I can send you pics on how to do it. And I had Star Trek doors made.
Now let's talk about the cloud journey, this topic that resonated with all of you, like multiple methods of getting there. So is there a preferred method? We talked about the lift and shift or the greenfield. I think most of you had experience with a little bit of both, but David?
So I've done both metaphors. I've done the migrate in place and then total greenfield. So one of my guys said something that was great, and I live to this day, is how did God create the world in 7 days? No legacy infrastructure. Right? One took 2 years, one took 5 months. If you can just literally build a new environment and move your things onto it, it is infinitely easier. And remember, CIO means career is over. Right? It's painful because the consensuing to move everything and keep everybody happy while you're moving the wheels on is insane.
I think from our perspective, John, it was almost the old adage where if you're going to conquer a new world, you're going to burn the ship so nobody can go back. Ultimately, we dumped Active Directory right away and Exchange, so it was a no choice. There was no going back. And it was a completely green field. So how to do it, and this was back at a time when, in 2009, really, you couldn't find anyone to have the conversation about. So a lot of what we were doing was basically a very, very risk-based scenario at the time to go greenfield. But there was nothing worth lifting and shifting. It was more advantageous for us to start over before we commercialized our first product, which is what we did.
How about you, Fabio?
I think that it very much depends on your current infrastructure. I mean, when we started the journey to the cloud, which was 2015, we were running 14,000 images. So you cannot imagine to lift and shift all the 14,000 images. Neither you can imagine to rebuild from scratch 14,000 images. So we went through a classification work, and we found all the stuff that could be lifted and shifted, and we moved it outside. Then we identified what we had to transform completely from great field, so a few but big application. And then we put another part of the workload in, let me say, technology suspended state, waiting for the right technology to come out. And it came out. So by doing this, we closed a big data center in Madrid last year in June, which hosted 7,000 machines. And part of those machines, we moved them to the cloud directly. Part of those which were not cloud ready, and we felt it was not worthwhile doing the whole transformation, we moved that in another data center, on-premise, in Italy. Then at the end of this year, we will close the Naples data center, and the technology has matured so that we think we will be a cloud-only company by the end of next year, closing the third and last data center, which is in Milan. And so now we are running almost 18,000 images, and it is going upward, because once you are in the cloud, then it goes faster. And the next move will be going serverless, so not talking anymore about virtual images, but about services. So the way you address the move to the cloud is very much dependent on the dimension you have to manage and what you need to do and how fast you want to migrate. If you want to move fast to the cloud, you have to do lift and shift. There's no way. If you can. When I say fast, I meant I closed the data center of 7,000 images in 9 months. This is what I mean, fast migration.
Can you say which cloud you're moving to?
Pardon?
Can you say which cloud you moved to?
The question was, can you say which cloud you're moving to?
Yes, I understood the question.
I'm
not driving.
I was doing that for the camera. I would have said it slower and louder if I was translating it for you.
But anyway, maybe the next question I'm not able to understand it, so please rephrase it. No. We elected AWS as a first provider, but we elected it because we ran a benchmark, and we started with the home handmade work, but then now we replicate it every 6 months, and it takes us a week. If you want, I can share the idea. We started with a qualitative evaluation of the breadth of services provided by the cloud provider. When I talk about services, I mean, for example, the certification, then the kind of machine that you can choose from, the operating system, the tagging and logging and billing options, the monitoring, all this kind of stuff that is useful to run the software. For example, let me name it. Google has a very rich way of providing machines, but in terms of certification, it's still very poor. So if you want to migrate a lot of Oracle stuff, you cannot move it to Oracle, to Google, for example. Then we ran a benchmark, picking from Sysbench a mixture of random write, random read, virtual CPU, and online transaction processing. And the mixture that we chose has to resemble our current benchmark. So we created the Enel benchmark workload. And we ran it against all the cloud providers in 5 kinds of machines: medium, small, medium, big, and big. And eventually, we measure the cost. So once you plot all of this in a 3-dimensional space with cost, performance, and the breadth of services, and you can easily make your way. It took us 3 months the first time we did it. It was late 2014 when we chose AWS. Now we repeat it every 6 months, and it takes us a week. And by doing this, we are able to choose to keep track of the market, and so that when we renew the contract with the provider, we always guarantee that a fraction of the load is free, is not committed, so that just in case somebody shows up, we can move.
And speaking
I
of-
will not tell you the other competitors because, but if you want.
Yeah, catch up with them afterwards. Speaking of cost, we did talk about this, but let's go back to you, Patrick. Cost isn't usually on the top of the list for any kind of chief justification, but it does come up a lot. Many people that I've talked to are often surprised that cloud isn't necessarily cheaper than what they're doing to begin with. But do you go in with a cost-saving story, or what, as a supplier, what's your pitch?
So, not in sales, but typically we try not to start off with cost because that's just a losing battle. Typically, a customer will come to us and say cost doesn't matter, and of course, the moment they get a price, all that matters is cost. It's amazing how that works out. But the problem with cloud, especially, and I don't mean to pick on Amazon, but they really are an outlier when it comes to this. When it comes to cloud, and many clouds are like this, but Amazon especially, when you get your bill, it's essentially impossible to tell what you're paying for. I mean, I've had people explain that you need a PhD to understand Amazon billing model. So while cost is not the most important thing, of course this is important, right? If one person is 1% better and 10 times as much, you're not going to go with them, right? So you need to have the cost in your n-dimensional matrix. He was mentioning a 3-dimensional. Most of the things we look at are many more than 3 dimensions. There's lots of variables involved. Cost is one of them, and it can be weighted. Be careful when you go to get your cloud quote that you are looking at everything it will cost. We do not lead with cost, but we will try and make it cost effective. Everybody does. Whether you go into Rackspace or Joe's dog and his fish bait tackle shop, they're all going to try and make it cost effective to you. Just make sure that you're comparing apples to apples and that you know your entire cost and then what the additionals are. Because I guarantee you, however much work you've put into it, once you get onto the cloud, there will be things you didn't think of. Did that make sense? It was a little bit babbly, sorry.
Any other takes on cost, or?
I don't know if I should really discuss cost.
One of the things that I found useful is when people talk about going to cloud, it's highly useful to be above 90% virtualized with whatever you're moving. Caveat being, if you have a mainframe or an AS400, that's a different problem.
I mean, 90% of your legacy?
Yeah, 90% of your world you put into a virtual environment, VMware, OpenStack, pick your flavor. What that does is it gives you a pretty good concept of how data is going to flow, how things are going to act. And then when you move it out, you are not nearly as surprised. Also, moving it's easier.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? I can keep going all day, but it looks like we have a lot. Sir? Yeah.
So interested in your comments around platform as a service, and I think from your subsequent comment about benchmarking, I understand why. Where is platform as a service appropriate in using higher level services?
Okay. Just repeat the question. Where is platform as a service appropriate for using higher level cloud services?
If I may step in the discussion, platform as a service is a kind of a blurry concept, okay? Because the best definition I can find for platform as a service is something between infrastructure and software, nothing else. Because it very much depends. There are many businesses that started as a software as a service and then find a way to broaden the kind of services provided. They step down to platform as a service, okay? One good example is, for example, Salesforce. Okay, that started as a CRM solution. Now it is much broader. But this is easy to manage, and many other examples also. Here are presented some. Other kinds of platform are services that provide something more than infrastructure. I will quote SAP, for example, HANA Enterprise Cloud or sub-cloud platform. These are kind of platform as a service that evolved from infrastructure as a service. And they might be interesting because I heard sometimes that SAP workload cannot go to the cloud. This is not true. Platform as a service provided by SAP can help doing the transition, but not necessarily a requisite. Okay, so platform as a service are needed for kind of workload very specific to your situation where you are tied to somebody and you want to move, and probably it's not yet ready. The infrastructure as a service model has not yet already a solution for that. Okay.
So one other way to think about it, kind of sideways, is let's say you want to go containers, right? Right. I would highly recommend you think about platform as a service. The number of people who actually know how to run containers, can globally scale them, can load balance, all those, have somebody do that for you. That's when platform as a service is highly useful, right? Because it reduces your entry time, reduces the time to teach your team. You can make the decision later if you want to move it, because it's a container, who cares? But that is a fastball down the middle kind of world for a development organization to get that up and moving.
Other questions? Sure.
Can you speak to, I mean, we're talking kind of nuts and bolts a little bit here. Can you talk about sort of these big, moves to the cloud that you made, and what sort of like executive level, like, you had to overcome, how you sort of like overcame like organizations that were afraid of the cloud, or didn't understand it, or was that your experience at all, and it's just not a thing you have to do?
Nathan, maybe you can start with that since you, let's repeat the question. What kind of FUD did you encounter in your organizations when you pushed to the cloud?
Sure. So it was, so my pitch at the time was that we were pre-commercial on our first drug. And we could go one of two directions at the time. One was to build a CRM environment in-house. The options were very, very limited at the time for hosted or cloud CRM. Or we could go this other way, which would enable us to rapidly bring in 300 sales reps, get them launched, get them up and running. I mean, the iPads still weren't out at this time, so we had to go with tablets to take signatures. So figuring out how to do that, we really said, well, we got 4 months. I mean, what can we do in 4 months? And so the decision was, well, we can quickly do this, which was to go with a cloud, a CRM. There were only 2 at the time, Salesforce or Stay in Front. We opted for Stay in Front because it was a smaller sales force and it was selling direct to physicians. But that was sort of the driver for us. And I said, we can do this thing. And by the way, here's all the other things we can do too. We can give them Google Mail. We can get rid of VPNs. We can make sure that they can work from anywhere. And we started passing in all these credentials. At the end of it, the final bullet was the cost. We can save this much money. And I only need this many people. Now, over time, of course, that has a scale to it. Which you have to begin to compensate for, and the cost becomes sort of a bullet you don't really talk about anymore. But those other remaining bullets are still hold true to this day, which is, another example is we just bought another drug in February, and the goal was to immediately launch it. So we went out and we hired 180 people, like right now, today. We're training them as we speak on Salesforce, and we're going to roll them out in a month. So to bring a whole commercial field force like that normally, it take 6 months to a year. We're doing it in 3 months. And that's, the cloud enabled that. So it's just the same story, 7 years later.
Well, at the time, again, the question, push back on security or compliance or anything?
Yeah, so again, those questions came up certainly at the time. How do we deal with security? I'm chagrined to admit it, but we used RSA at the time. Now we're just 2-factor across the board. But the RSA was our compensating mitigation for security, for authentication. Again, we didn't have Active Directory, so we had to come up with something sort of novel. And then in terms of compliance, we really only had 2 sort of domestic, what you would call measures we had to be concerned about, and both were just, they would have been mitigated by any platform. We had to be concerned with SOX compliance as a public company, and Sunshine Act, sort of the early beginnings of that. Now we have, I don't know how many compliance acts, 6 or 7 we have to deal with, but it's, again, the same story just repeated over and over.
Okay. Sir?
I'm interested in the people and process side of your transitions from cloud. I think as David mentioned, you still have to operate. Interested to know how you changed those operations, and interested in having your transition of skill sets through that change as you went from in-house to cloud, for those of you that had legacy and were in greenfield.
So the question again being about transition of staff, principally? And process from legacy to cloud.
So that's why, I'm a fan of greenfield, because you can literally show people how it operates, right? So humans are meaning-making machines. Whatever they do today is the most important thing to them, right? And so being able to set up that in a new environment and work through how you operate it, it's almost like on-the-job training, right? That's the transition. The other side of the equation, and what I would call the secret sauce, is historically what I've driven to is how do I automate my existing environment, like get to 90% virtualized, take advantage of all the automation to literally free up time for my teams to do that transition. So I'll bring in, people to do the grind work, but the brain work is left to my teams to actually learn and how to do that. So I'll get them trained, do all that piece. But that transition is technology is easy, people are hard, right? It's the age-old saying. And so it's like boiling a frog. You got to take them through those pieces one step at a time. You can't say, here's the entire new world, have a good day. It is build it, let them be in build. How do you operate? I would not put my most important apps on it first. Put a couple, let them start operating, right? And again, it's just that wheel. It's the spiral up effect of getting them successful, making them feel like they know how to do. Go through testing, go in and pull the plugs and make things stop. Netflix has, all the, little tricks to shut down pieces of your AWS. And you have to go through that because it's not only how the infrastructure works, it's how it doesn't work. What happens when there's an epic fail? And have people been through that fire drill so it's not a surprise? You find out where your processes are missing, but it is that process that you have to go through. And the other side of it, in my role, you have to be an evil overlord with a hug, right? At the same, we are going to do this. It is going to be hard. It's going to be painful. You're going to go through that. Expect it. There is no panacea. Just a little hard work, effort, and some decent leadership.
Yes, it is a difficult migration, but to add a point to this, in my personal experience, once we define the strategy and we talk to the CIO and to the CEO of the company, because the move to the cloud is the company move, not just an IT decision. But to have the people adopt, buy in the concept of the migration, especially at the operation department, because you're talking to people that have to close the room that they used to manage. So they are the ones who know the mainframe, they know the data server, they know the control room. You have to tell them, close everything to move to the cloud. And I found out that a fantastic motivation level was to have, for once, operation department leading the dance. Historically, you had the development department looking for new technologies, building new solution, typically not manageable from the operation level, and then let the dirty work to the operation. For one time, I said, you have the opportunity to switch the model and say, you lead the dance, you say to the development what they have to do, and you lead the dance. And even if it is not ready, because yes, at the beginning you can go through some pain, some painful moments, but then again, you are doing the right thing. So having the operation department for 1 year and a half leading the dance has proved to be a fantastic motivational level. And between a motivated, unprepared guy and a very professional, not motivated guy, I would forever choose the first one.
I'm going to take back the questioning for 1 minute. I want to change a little bit to the cloud outages that we've experienced this year. Not with your organization, Patrick, but some prominent cloud outages this year. So, what have we learned from that? Do SLAs cover for that, or is it really a question of architecture?
JV versus varsity.
I'm going to ask Patrick. I'm going to back up to you, Dave.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to disagree. JV versus varsity. There is no such thing as perfection, and anybody who says there is lying. I've worked for some of the largest corporations in the world, doing some of the largest web stuff in the world, and little things, it's just going to happen. There's just no way around it, which is why I said during a previous answer that during your shared fate, please use multiple providers, multiple clouds, multiple whatever. 9DNS, Amazon, Akamai, Google, these people run some of the best operations in the world. I've seen it inside, I've run them. But Google had an outage because some guy typed something in that he should not have. It wasn't part of the procedure, it wasn't part of the thing, and there were ways to stop him from doing it that he overrode, and the override was in there for a reason. But he did it, and all their traffic got routed through Japan from the US, and www.google.com was down for 90 minutes or whatever. They're not JV. They know what they're doing. They do it well, and it's going to happen. So be prepared. All of these companies have a mantra. Something's going to fail. Like you mentioned, Netflix has, I forget what they're called, like elves or bunnies or something, literally go around and pull stuff out or shut things down without telling anybody. And they do that on purpose to see if you are ready for the outage. Google has presented on things. They assume every server, every data center is going to go away. And they make plans for what happens when that happens. Akamai does the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. You need to do the same thing. And then you'll come to a point where you go, okay, if X happens and we're down for an hour, it's going to cost $1 billion. So you know what, screw it, we're going to go ahead and weather that 1 hour outage. Or if X happens, it's going to cost us $100,000 to fix it, and we can't be down for an hour, so here's the check. And you need to do that up front. And you need to be prepared, and you need to have everyone in your organization from the top to the bottom aware that this is going to happen. You cannot stop it. You know, meteors hit the ground. I've actually been asked, what if a meteorite hits this data center? I explained to them that I won't care anymore because I work in this data center. But you know, you have to make those things, you have to wonder about those decisions. The most heartbreaking conversation I've ever had is back a long time ago. I was talking to a guy in 2000, and I said, where's your network? I was a network architect. He said, well, we have loop A through tower 1 and loop B through tower 2. And I said, those are kind of close together. And he said, look, if both towers go down, we have bigger problems. You know what? We did have bigger problems, but he still had an outage that he could not fix. Think of these things. Be prepared. It will happen. Period. End of sentence.
Other takes on that? All right,
So
David?
the JV versus varsity is JV architectures versus, right, senior architects.
Okay.
Right? So the point is you always have to be prepared that something in your world is going to go away, and how do you deal with it, right? Like simple things, have 2 DNS providers, right? When it went out, tons of people went out. Big companies, you're like, you only have 1 DNS provider? That's what right? If you are not prepared for that movie, JV versus varsity, right? Be varsity.
Just one sentence. Remember, when you think about these things, or better, do not forget the outages that you suffered on premises, doing comparison with the outages on the cloud.
Say that again? I missed it.
No, I say on-prem, you probably, when you think and worry about outages in the cloud, don't forget the outages that you run into on premises. But probably are much more.
Okay.
Just to be optimistic, because it was a bit dramatic. And,
Sir?
Breaches, security at the network level, data level, especially if you're in a shared resource environment. Coming from the financial business, you worry about, of all things, money. Individual identification, identifying information. And back to breaches. Every network's vulnerable. And in a cloud environment, that vulnerability, should there be a breach, can translate down to the subscriber. Can you just talk about that?
So,
where the cloud is today versus where it was 2 years ago.
so the question being about breaches in general in the cloud and at the network and data level?
well, you know, let's start with Europe. You know that Europe is more concerned about data protection than USA typically, you know. And as long as data remain in Europe, I personally was able to convince even the Italian government to let the data go to the cloud. So there is a lot of fear about the security breaches of data in the cloud just because they are on the cloud. But that is not based on concrete evidence. Okay, because I feel that my data in the cloud are much safer than when I personally manage them in my building. So first, because they, you know, I come from the energy world, and we have the concept of intrinsic security. You know what happens with the nuclear generation. There is a correlation of every nuclear power plant in the world. Fukushima, you remember what happened to Fukushima? Somebody did a very stupid move and a sequence of stupid action in Japan, and we had to close the power plant in Germany and in Italy. And there is no correlation about what did the engineer in Germany or in Italy, what did the engineer in Japan. But just the idea, that the nuclear power is not safe, has damaged the whole nuclear power industry. That now is going down. This is very much the same situation for cloud. If you have a big security breach, which you can account to the cloud provider, then it would damage all the cloud providers. So there is dramatic attention on this. Having said this, do not forget that causes of breaches can depend much more on you. I say you, meaning your organization than your cloud provider. Because if you, very stupid example, you provision a website on the cloud provider which is not protected for SQL injection, and you have a breach, you cannot blame the cloud provider for this.
Oh, they do.
Yes, but in that case, you are right.
Oh, they do.
And second, the network, I would say, is the most weak element. And we have not spoken about the cloudification of the network. But when you want to go to the cloud with the network, I'm talking about natural carrier facilities, software-defined network function virtualization. In that case, you have to be totally aware of the security breaches you can inadvertently introduce in your security. Because the cloud data center, at the end, is a data center. It's pretty safe. But if you do not rely on hardware appliance anymore to connect there with network, then and it is software defined, then you have to be very, very well aware of what you're doing.
It's actually a good bridge to another discussion that we had about, most of the people I talk to are convinced that security in the cloud is better than they can muster on their own in the data center. But we started talking about the way the adoption of cloud changes the security roles in the organization. Can we shift to that, or I saw you both want to say something about?
Well, I was just going to make a comment that there's two levels. Security is a multi-layered thing, so please, first of all, make sure that you are secure. He brought up some of the problems that you can have. There are other things, encrypt everything. That doesn't mean you're perfect, because somebody puts a keylogger on your machine, and it doesn't matter if you encrypt it, et cetera, but make sure you have multi-factor authentication, that your security practices are correct, that you can't be, people can't get in through social engineering, that you encrypt at rest and on the wire, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you got to trust your cloud provider. There's just no way around it. The nice thing, and speaking as a cloud provider, is if you think about it, each one of you has somebody that's attacking you. You have adversaries, enemies that are trying to get into you. We have all of those and lots more. So we have to have a bit, and I don't mean to say that none of you are doing good security, I'm just saying that we have to protect at a higher level for all the reasons that were mentioned, and because we're getting many more attacks, and because of lots of other reasons. So fortunately, most of the cloud providers, at least the big ones and the ones that have a good reputation, have a good security staff, and they know what they're doing, and they are paranoid as heck. And that's the good news. But at the end of the day, you are correct. There is some trust there. If the chief security architect of Amazon decides that he wants your data, chances are he's going to get it if you're on AWS. So you have to have some protection there. The question is that a bigger risk than your own employees? And I would argue that it's actually not, on balance. Maybe not in specific, but on balance, if you take all companies across the planet Earth, I'm going to argue that the cloud provider actually has better security than the average company out there, or even above average company out there. So yes, you have to have some protection. You have to take your own steps to it. But I think you're going to be okay if you use a cloud provider. I might be biased.
We have financial services firms who are encrypting everything in their own keys. How would Amazon's security architect get through that? We get everything locked in. We have 10 additional third-party security tools.
So the question is, if you have lots of security tools and you have encrypt on your own and you have your own keys, and by the way, any cloud provider that says they're going to encrypt for you, run away, keep your own keys. Like I mentioned, let's just assume, and I don't know what you're doing, but let's assume you have a VDI, for instance, and you encrypt everything from start to finish. But somebody logs into their virtual desktop, and he's got to type in he's got to type something into it. And if I've installed a keylogger on it, which I don't know what security tools you're using, but frequently the security tools that most people use are encrypting on the disk and they're encrypting on the wire, but the virtual terminal itself may or may not be open. I mean,
That wouldn't be the Amazon security certificate. That would be somebody in their own terminal.
So
I don't want to belabor.
yeah, we could get down this. The point is, there is a chance that somebody in the cloud might be able to get your data, but you should do your homework, and it's a game of inches, right? So the more layers you put, the less likely it is that you're going to get hacked or breached. So do that work.
I'm not sure I would agree with that statement, though, in the sense that you have threat prevention and threat detection right now, and if you're focused on protecting the data, it doesn't matter how many layers you put between you and the data and somebody else. All it requires is one very, very simple attack, phishing attack. Someone drops a USB stick. The age-old social engineering attacks are still alive and well. And most often, those are the ones that start the root of any sort of major attack. You're finding a very, very simple mistake made.
Yeah, and those are indifferent between whether you're in the cloud or whether you're on.
It doesn't matter. For as long as there's been data centers or cloud, it's exactly the same model. All someone has to do is get that one simple bit of information, and they can unravel the thread. So from our perspective, it's about basically protecting the data. If someone wants to compromise a device, we really don't care. Everyone has the local admin password in our company. It's full BYOD. We can no longer care about that. It's just way too expensive to do that. We do have traditional security roles. We have a director of security, and we have a gentleman that reports to him as well. But every single person in my department, 44 people, have all been trained on security. They've all gotten their network and security plus training. They're all trained to test and look for these things. It's not just 2 people. And then the organization itself is trained. So we've gone all the way out to the point where there's annual required training, the semi-annual required training, depending on your roles, on actually training people to be security engineers. From an executive administrative assistant all the way up to the CEO, they're trained to look for things, to understand that it's not just 2 people protecting the data, but everyone in the company has to protect the data. It's actually a buy-in that's pretty critical. If only 2 people are relying, or a handful of security people are doing it, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to get in.
Okay. Sorry, you had a question?
Yeah, maybe related to that, going with questions earlier, but the specific changes that you needed to make from a governance perspective as you went through the cloud journey?
Governance for security or governance in general?
Governance, cloud governance in general, not just security.
Huge.
So the question again, just so we get it on tape, is are there governance issues that you had to address before you made the cloud journey?
I mean, certainly. Just taking for example, your average SaaS platform. As soon as it's launched, what's the business going to want to do? They're going to want to continue to improve it. You can go so far as to create a center of excellence around how you're going to intake requests for change or adaptation or bolting on, or you can just have one sort of business analyst or somebody take it. But creating governance around a lot of structures and a lot of concepts for us has proven to be extremely valuable. We have a middleware COE. It's a team comprised of the business and my department that focuses on all middleware changes, all requests. I want to connect A to B to make C. This group discusses it, and they discuss it from a security perspective, or what data are we exposing perspective. Is it critical perspective? I mean, I wouldn't say we're overpopulated and over COE ourselves, but we have enough governance models in place, data, analytics, middleware, to really control these platforms and these ideas. Otherwise, it would just be all generating from IA or be coming in through shadow IT. So by doing this, those governance models actually, most of what we do is invented from these core groups.
Other takes on that?
If you have a SOX 404 access to your data center, right, under your IAM compliance, you're probably going to have to get that one removed. Stuff like that.
Regarding, what changes when you migrate to cloud, we talked a little bit about it, but what had to change within the IT organization? Especially you, Fabio, if you're really planning to go all in what, another year and a half? So will you have to remake the IT department, or are you doing it step by step? Or?
No, we change it dramatically. I will start from the governance question, because the first thing, if you want to go to the cloud, it means that you outsource the infrastructure. Then you have to find out how to manage the services which may be externalized on platform as a service and software as a service a little bit more than infrastructure as a service. So you have to find the right balance between internal knowledge and external knowledge. But the first thing we decided was to keep totally internal the governance. And by governance, I do not only talk about the governance of data management at very high level, but also the governance of how you run your operation department, the governance of automation, the governance of monitoring issues, the governance of migration policies. All this kind of stuff has to be. My advice is that you have to be in control of that. It can be performed by system integrator or things like this, but you need to know what you're doing. And so once you have done this, then we moved we totally restructured the operation department. First, we had the people that manage the data center of Spain, the data center of Italy, the data center of South Italy, and East Europe. We totally changed the organization, creating an engineering team, the one who look for new technology and find a way to do the migration or find a way to manage, for example, Dockers or DevOps and things like this. Then we have the operation department, we call them technological services, that kind of industrialize what comes from the engineering service and scale it to manage thousands or tens of thousands of images and customers. And on top of that, on top of the two, we put a service management function whose task is to do the monitoring so that the same unit doesn't do the monitoring and provide the service. Who monitors doesn't provide the service, and who does the service doesn't do the monitoring. So we have kind of a segregation of duty. And the guys who do the monitoring with their platform also do the service management. So are the faces the people that face the customer. And eventually telecommunication is another department. So we had to completely restructure the organization and also to retrain the people. But again, I would say that retraining the people has not been difficult, because if the project is a success, they want to learn. So the people that shut down the mainframe, they shot a video the day they shut down it, because they were happy and they were completely destroying the work that they were doing. So this is not the problem. The problem which I'm facing more in changing the organization, and I don't know this if it is something that affects my company or it is a more widespread feeling, is that the telecommunication teams are more reluctant to go to the cloud, to go to open platform. They have a very deep knowledge of what they are doing, and I find it challenging to change that, much more than changing the operation department that manages the data center.
Okay, David or Nathan on that one?
We eliminated all the commodity roles, or we never actually started hiring them. So if it's a commodity role, it's bought, not hired. So we have basically SMEs in each one of our stacks. We have a cloud architecture stack and so on and so forth. And we only go out and hire specific SMEs who then either manage the bars or manage other SMEs. But we got rid of all the commodity roles. It was just to have somebody in who's building a database or checking a database or doing log monitoring. There was no need to purchase those roles anymore. So all of our hiring is SME based. And that allows us to give them a certain amount of money to build their own little mini organizations around how it is the business should operate.
Okay, David?
I've covered
it. All right, only got a couple minutes left here. So final words of advice for people that are about to make the cloud journey or in the middle of it?
I can tell you, not a joke, but something that happened to me when I started, I was at the beginning of the transition to the cloud. It was January 2015. It was a round table organized by HP, if I well remember, with a lot of customer banks, and there were a European customer. And at the end of the round table, just like you, the moderator said, where do you think you are in 5 years from now? And I said, very naively, I said, well, in 5 years from now, I will be totally in the cloud. The whole audience started to laugh. Oh, the Italian guys who is playing bully. 2 years after and a half, I tell you, is there anybody here who thinks that in 5 years from now, we'll still have something that is not in the cloud? if the answer is yes, be prepared to change something relevant in your strategy. Cloud has some disadvantages. We talk about security, we talk about governance, but cloud is where the world is heading. Every new service, every new technology is developed on product and feature that offer in the cloud. So if you are not going to the cloud, you are automatically cut off from a very big development of technology. So the question is not whether the cloud is important, things like this. It is a reality. You have to and find your way to.
Interesting. David?
So my view on the cloud is, in today's world, speed is one of the ultimate competitive advantages. And if you are not enabling your org to go fast, you are probably going to lose. And so that's what the cloud enables. When you move to the cloud, I tell people, think about the network, because you have to move a lot more stuff. Petabytes of anything is a lot, and it takes time to move it, so plan for that. And again, it's about moving your people through the continuum and teaching them, training them, and giving them the support and leadership to adapt.
Okay, Patrick?
I think the number one thing about people moving to the cloud is that you have to throw out all your preconceived notions. The number of people who walk into my office and say, hey, I'd like to do X because that's what we did in our own data center is uncountable, right? Don't think that you have to change the way you do things because you have to fit to the cloud. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you should actually dream what you could do. What would you, if like you had a magic wand and you could wave it, what would you like? Start there. You may not get there, but start there, and it'll help get rid of the cobwebs of, oh, well, I could never do that in my data center, so I won't ask the cloud provider to do it. Just dream big, okay? Because you might get there.
Nate?
I would say forget allegiances. The cloud industry has been born, died, born again multiple times. Each time new phoenixes are rising from the ashes. But to say, oh, I'm going to be using this vendor for 3 years is a complete fabrication. There's no one vendor you'll use today that will be the same as the vendor you're going to use 3 years from now. So when you think about a roadmap, think about the technology. Don't get too attached to any one of your vendors. They're just going to change. And they're changing so rapidly. I'd say 18 months would probably be a very long time to be with a single vendor in any case.
Interesting.
Yes.
All right.
Just ask a follow-up to that.
Sure. Real quick.
Are you talking about cloud vendors?
I am.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you all very much for your participation. Great questions, and I want to thank our panelists. Thanks for coming.